Shalom, shalom, Mishpachah. This is your Yao checking in. I don't think I've done one of these in a little while. It's been a few days, and I was doing them back to back to back to back there for a while. Um, but but I did really want to get back into doing them. Maybe I'll do some that are a little bit shorter, maybe some quick, short, to kind of get the ball rolling on some of these topics. I'm thinking that the shorts are getting a little bit more attention to lives. So I'm thinking that I will just start to make probably tidbits of info and then put them out via short so that it'll just draw more attention to these lives. And then when, there's enough people that have enough interest, then we'll get back into the swing of doing regular lives. But I hope you guys are doing well. Um, I wanted to get on here and talk about the name of the Messiah. And I guess it's not apparent to everyone exactly what name we should be calling and why, and what are the reasons why some of the other names don't work. So we'll just go over real quickly some of the options we have and then whittle those options down according to the information that we have. Okay, so the first thing is, of course, we have in Acts chapter 4, verse 12, it says, uh, there is one name for there is one name under heaven, or is it for there is one name? It says, neither is that there salvation in any other, for there is one name under heaven given among men why we must be saved. So that's a really, really, really important verse right there in Acts, because it tells us that there is one name of salvation, right? And so does this conflict with old chapter 2, verse 32, right? It's in that verse says, what does it say? It says, for whosoever calls on the name of Yah, for whosoever calls on the name of Yahweh will be saved. For out of Zion comes deliverance, I believe it says. So let's discuss that for just a quick second before we get into the name and get into the prophetic significance of the name and the prophetic instances of the name. So in Exodus, it's Exodus chapter 23, we have a very strange, correspondence between Elohim and Moses, where Elohim says that I will send an angel before you for you to follow in the way. This is Exodus 23:20. It says, um, beware of him and hear his voice, for he will not pardon your transgressions. And that's a strange thing for Elohim to say about this particular angel. Do you see what I'm saying? You have an angel that is going before Moses and the children of Israel in the wilderness, who is at this time unnamed, right? They're not telling you what the name of this angel is, right? We know it to be the angel that Jacob wrestled with in Genesis 32. Stop playing, boy. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. They've been trying to sneak up on me and scare me. So we know that it's the same angel in Genesis 32 that wrestled with Jacob, right? At Peniel. I think it's Peniel. Yeah, Peniel. Face of Elohim, right? We know that's the same angel because later on, when he's blessing Joseph's children, he says, may this angel bless them too. May the angel that followed me all my days and carried me, the angel who, the Elohim, this, it even says in Genesis 47, 48, that this angel is also an Elohim, right? And so we know that Paniel, the place that he saw this angel was Paniel, and that means the face of Elohim, right? And then we see later on in that same book that Jacob is blessing his grandchildren and allowing that same angel to bless them as well. Except he calls this angel and an Elohim. And he says that this angel has followed them going back to the time of Abraham, right? So we recognize that this is that same angel. If we jump from Jacob to Isaiah, so several hundred years there, about, oh, I guess it would be about 1,000 years, a little more than 1,000 years, to Isaiah 63. It says the angel of his presence saved them and carried them all the day. The same formula, the same Hebraic formula about this angel, the angel of his presence, right? And if you look that word up in the Hebrew, presence in the Hebrew is the word pani, right? So the angel of his face is what it says. So Paniel, where Jacob saw the angel initially, is the same angel that Isaiah is describing, and the same entity that would come later in the flesh, um, for salvation, to save those that belong to Elohim. So with that understanding, we then come into the reality of the Messiah. We know that the Messiah is an entity that was made into flesh and walked among us, right? And then we also know that Elohim sent this entity and in his name required salvation. This has gone forward since, or gone backwards since Abraham. So people, you know, get Isaiah, I think this is Isaiah 46, so there's no salvation in any other. Uh, uh, I alone am Elohim, and there is no salvation in the other. I think it says in that term there is Yeshua. There is no Yeshua in any other. So people are thrown off by that and say, whoa, wait a second. If there's no Yeshua, the person that I'm worshiping is named Yeshua. Do you see what I'm saying? So this is, a stumbling block that many people have fallen on, because this scripture says this in Isaiah. But it also says the angel of his presence saved them in Isaiah 63. So if you don't get, if you get stuck 42, I think it's 42 or 46 where it says that, um, and they don't make it to 63, then you don't recognize in the text that there is a clear understanding that goes beyond, just there being I alone. We understand that one Most High, there is one entity above all, right? Um, but what we don't understand is that that entity has multiple entities working for him and through him. Do you see what I mean? And with this understanding, we see that one of those entities was was assigned the task of being introduced into earth in order to produce a people group who were worthy of salvation, who trusted the word of Elohim, who believed in the face of danger. Do you see what I mean? And this is the point, this is the purpose of why Messiah came into this world, right? These are all things that are facts. These are scientific facts, because we don't think of spiritual reality as science. but it must be because science just means knowledge, right? We look at the science behind ants. There's a ant trail right here. We look at the science behind birds, or the way that the sunlight affects a plant. Do you see what I mean? But we can't measure or attain the effect of the spirit on the world. In fact, the word for spirit is ruach, right? Which means wind. It just means wind. But there must be more to it than that, right? Because the wind is blowing right now. It blows every day. And it's not conscious and inhabiting things and actively making decisions in reality. It's just blowing from the east to the west. What's the difference between that wind and the wind that's coming out of my mouth? That's spirit as well. This is the, um, the deeper understanding of what type of world we're in. We're in a spiritual world, so we have to understand things from a spiritual perspective. If we only look at the material world, then our science is limited. What's the spiritual science? We can only ascertain the spiritual science from what we're told. Do you know what I mean? Do you see what I'm saying? And so here we are. Here we are with the understanding that the Messiah came into the world, and he was a spirit that was made into flesh, that he's been around since the very beginning. He's been in Israel's life since Israel was called Israel. This is the entity that gave Israel his namesake, the namesake that carries on to this day, right? The namesake that the nation holds. Do you see what I mean? So Messiah is instrumental in Israel. There would be no Israel if it wasn't for Messiah. And so his fleshly manifestation has to be as significant, has to be as prophetic. And so we can find it. It says we can find him um, uh, based on what the text already says, and we can identify him, from the past to the future. And the way that we identify him is through his name. Sorry, you guys got a little confused at what I was talking about there for a second, but we can find the truth in his name because his name is hidden today. Do you see what I'm saying? Why hide the name of salvation if it's not salvation? Do you see what I mean? And so let me get to the point of this video. It's enough backstory. So the name that we've been given in the New Testament here in the 21st century is, of course, not the name that was used 2,000 years ago. The name Jesus was never spoken by anybody for any reason until the 16th century, until about 400 years ago. And that's important too, because since this letter is only about 400 years old, our captivity is 400 years old. And some of the things that are happening coincide with the fact that we've been in this extreme captivity. So the letter J was invented about 400 years ago and immediately applied to the Bible. And so all the names with Yod in them at their beginning turn from a Y sound to a J sound. Like Jeremiah is Yirmiyahu. Um, uh, Jedediah is Yadayahu. Um, and then we come to, uh, I was going to say Joshua, but we're going to save that one because we know that that is the name of salvation there, but it's been really tampered with. Joshua is a very wild misrepresentation of what the sound actually is, what the word actually is. So let's take a look. Since we know it's not Jesus, let's find what it actually is. So many people use the term Yeshua, right? Many people use the term Yeshua. And the problem with Yeshua is that, let me go about this a different way. Let me go from a different direction. Let's talk about what the name actually is and why it's actually this name instead of what it's not. And then we'll go to the points of where it's what it's not, because I know that people want to know exactly which is which, right? So the name that is used most often in the Bible, the name that is used 1,200 times, I believe it is, the spelling that's used 1,200 times in the text is Yod, He, Wah, Shin, Ayin. And all these multiple interpretations word have come from the vowel pointing around the word. Do you see what I mean? So Yod, He, Wah, Shin, Ayin. That's Yod is in Yah, He is in Ha, Wah is in Oh, Shin, Sh, and then Ayin, Ah, Ah. Some people will say I for Ayin, and that's maybe the case, but with all of my research, it's told me that the Ayin letter is a deeper guttural sound like an oh, oh, not an oh, like a oh, like an A sound with the back of your throat. So Yahusha, like that, right? Yahusha. And that's important because this is the name that they give for Joshua in the Hebrew. No matter what the vowel pointing, the Nikud vowel, those dots around the Hebrew, no matter what that says, the consonantal structure, or you could say the alphabetic structure, aleph-beit structure, is very simple. Yod He Wah, Shin Ayin. The only reason you get Yehoshua and all of these other various interpretations of the name is because of the vowel pointing around it, right? Joshua even comes from vowel pointing. And this is, of course, later interpretation, but vowel pointing. Do you see what I mean? Except for the J. The J is, of course, an English insertion. So Yod, He, Wah, Shin, Ayin. And as far you people that follow this channel will know that Yod, He, Wah, and Yod, He, Wah, He too is pronounced Yao or Yao. You understand what I mean? Yao. And so the last two letters are very simple. Yahusha, right? And so what does that mean? It means Yao is salvation because it's two words put together. It's Yao with the Hey missing, and then Yesha, which means salvation. This is where the term Yeshua comes from. The simple term Yesha. It's a verb that means to save, right? And so that verb, when you conjoin it with the name of the Father, the Yod in the front drops. And then you just have the Shin Ayin at the end to identify that this is the term used for salvation. Um, and so that happens a lot, actually, with other terms. There's another term, Nisha, which means to lift up. The noon, whenever you're conjugating it, the noon drops off. The noon in the front is spelled noon, shin, aleph. And so that noon in the front drops off, and then it just leaves the shah at the end. And so you have to know that shin, aleph is in reference to nisha in order to be able to translate it because the noon falls off. And, based on the context of the, whatever you're reading, of the document, you will easily be able to figure out which verb is in place. And we know that this is the verb that's in place because, of course, in Matthew 1, it says, his name shall be, and then in, of course, the King James Version, it says Jesus. And then it says, for he shall save his people from their sins, right? So this is the interpretation that Yahweh Shah is the individual that comes to save, that comes for salvation. You understand what I mean? So in the text, it's written Yod He Wah Shin Ayin. But the Nakud vowel pointing system around the text changes the way that the word is pronounced, right? And so when you have specific vowel sounds being inserted into places, you can really make a mess of what the name should sound like. And so people are following these vowel points, which were added to the text about 1,000 years after the Messiah was killed and resurrected, right? So the Nakud vowel pointing system is when you read the Hebrew, you can look at the dots and the underlines under the consonantal structure, and you can think, okay, well, that's always been a part of the text. It absolutely has not. If you go to the Dead Sea Scrolls and get the Isaiah scroll, there's no vowel pointing system there, right? This is a very new, relatively speaking, a very new addition to the text. The Nakud vowel pointing system, in fact, is a commentary. And I mean, that's for me, when I first heard, we're not getting a lot of interaction here, but people can go back and watch this. When I first heard that concept, that the Nakud vowel pointing system was just a very extensive commentary, it actually blew my mind. Do you understand what I mean? Because the way that we pronounce the word and the form of its definition depends on what Nakud is there. And while some of the Nakud may be, actual, and some of the interpretations are, many of the interpretations are real, there are some that are not. Do you understand what I mean? There are some interpretations that are false, that the Nakud gives you. There are whole conjugation systems that are in the Nakud vowel pointing system that don't really exist in the text, that are foreign to the text. Do you see what I mean? One man from the 1800s went as far as to say that the Nakud is by far the most corruptive element ever added to the Bible. The scripture says, you shall not add nor take away from this text. The Nakud vowel pointing system is an addition, and that addition causes the pronunciation of the words to be confused, to be jumbled, and then to be corrupted in some parts, with the name of salvation being, one of the most clearest examples. The very clearest example is, of course, the name of the Father. It's vowel pointed 6 different ways in the text, none of which are the correct one. Do you see what I mean? It's vowel pointed as Yahweh most of the time, because this is the interpretation that these particular group of Masorites, the Masorites are the ones that added the vowel pointing system, and they're a very, very late family emerging out of the 700s, emerging out of Babylon and other different places. These Masorites inserted these vowel points in the text, several hundred years after the Messiah's death, so they clearly have an agenda, right? If they're hiding names and, muddying the waters, then they do have an agenda, right? That agenda is to hide the true name of salvation. The fact that the name is hidden, but the text is not manipulated, just added to in such a way where the text is preserved, but the pronunciation isn't, is an example, or I should say proof, a witness, anti-witness kind of, that the name is important, right? Well, why would you jumble the name? Why would you muddy the waters if the name of salvation wasn't important? Do you see what I mean? Why would you do such a thing if if there was nothing to it, if it was some sort of false story, you wouldn't need for people not to say it. People could say it as much as they wanted. You only need for people not to say it if it's true. Do you see what I mean? And so the way that they vowel pointed Yahusha in the text is um, just based on, several formulas that they've used in other examples. I think they have a Shua or Sheva. Some people call it a Sheva, and they have a Holam Wa, and then they insert another Holam Wa after the Shin to indicate that there must have used to be a letter there, a Holam Wa there, and that gives it the Yehoshua pronunciation. And it's a clever way to really hide what's going on in the text, because there are several words that this Yehoshua could indicate. For instance, the Shua in the back, the Shin, quote unquote, Wa Ayin, right? Because the Wa is not there, it's just the dot, the Holam, which indicates that the Wa used to be there, the Vav. Some people would say Vav, right? The one that is an Oh sound. Some people have it being an Oo sound. Some people have it being a V sound. Some people have it being a W sound. And so these are all connected, because except for the V, of course. The V is kind of connected too, just because of the way it's written, the characters that it's written in. But all the other ones are connected. The U and the O and the W are all similar sounding sounds, whether we want to admit to it or not, or if we understand it that way. A W is a double U, so that's an O, right? And so since it's a double U, it must be related to that sound in some way, and we see how it is. And I'll get into that here in a moment. So that sound is usually the sound where people are thrown off at. The Vav, the Wa, the Oh. Some people call it the Oh. That's where people get thrown off, because if you insert that into a word, it can make a lot of changes to the word. So Yeshua and Yesha are not the same word. They can be two different words, right? So the term Yeshua, the Shua part at the end, can mean salvation. It can absolutely mean salvation, but it doesn't have to. It can also mean opulence, which we know is festive and overzealous spending and showy, um, showiness of wealth. That's opulence, right? If you overdo it, you say that's an opulent, the party is opulent. And I hope I'm getting this definition right. It's been a long time since I looked that word up, but from what I remember, it means just overly showy wealth, right? Do you see what I'm saying? And so that's not the same thing as salvation. Opulence and salvation are two different things. They may have a similar connotation in the Hebrew understanding of salvation. Whether it is or isn't, we don't know. But we know that Yeshua, can mean opulence as well as salvation. Yesha can't. Do you see what I'm saying? That's the difference between Shah and Shua. There's a huge gap between those two things, right? And so if you insert that Wa, that Holam Wa, and what it looks like is the little dot that's at the top level of the Hebrew, and it's going to be in between the Shin and the Ayin. It's a dot. It'll be right there by the left hand tip of the Shin. It's called a Holam Wa, and it represents an Oh sound. And what people don't recognize is that this is the original sound of the letter. This is the full sound of that letter Wa. That people call it an Oh, because it makes that Oh sound, right? And that Oh can express itself in kind of different ways depending on where it is in a word, right? If it's at the beginning of a word, it may express itself more as a wah, 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 like that. And that's the reason why people have come up with a W in front of words. If you have a wa at the beginning, and there's lots of words that have wa at the beginning, especially in Hebrew, right? In Arabic too. And this is why you see a lot of words with W in the beginning in Arabic, because they're interpreting that wa or that or that vav as a W when it's found at the beginning of a word, right? So it's a real interesting thing, the way that they've tampered with the text. It really points to the name of salvation being a strong and important name, the way that they've had to dig deeply to hide it. Do you see what I'm saying? They had to dig real deep and put the name in there and throw a bunch of dirt on top of it in order to hide it. So what we then have is the consonantal text that says Yahusha, right? And so let's talk about why Yehoshua is wrong. So again, we know the vowel pointing will throw you off. So what it does is it breaks down every syllable and it gives you wrong placements for the syllable, right? We understand that Od Hey Wah is Yao, right? Yao. And if you listen to Yao, you see what I mean? It could actually be spelled Yao. Do you hear the W? Yao, yo, yo. Do you hear the W? Yao. You hear it. And this is why that W comes with it sometimes, because Yao or Yao can be spelled Y-A-W. And you still end up with the same sound as Y-A-O. Do you see what I'm saying? What the translators did is they separated those as individual syllables, or I say the translators, the inserters of the Nakud vowel pointing system, the Masorites. What they did was they inserted those vowels so you wouldn't use the Yao as one syllable, or one common phonetical. Do you see what I'm saying? One structure, because it's not necessarily. It doesn't necessarily have to be one syllable. It could be Yao or Yao, right? So one structure, instead of it being one structure, they broke it up into a couple. So it's Yeho instead of Yao. You see how it's corrupted in that way? This is a lived form that Yao actually inhabits, entails, because you're reading it Yao. Do you understand what I mean? The Yod is Ye, the Hey is Ah, and the Wa, the O is O. Yah-O, Yao, right? And so that is the first part. And the second part, Shin Ayin, like we said, is really simple. It's just Shah, right? So when they insert these vowels in there and get Yehoshua, it completely changes the pronunciation of the word and the meaning. Because Yehoshua means Yeho is salvation, or Yeho is opulence, right? But Yahusha, the only thing it could mean is Yao is salvation. Do you understand what I'm saying? And this is what the text says, but what the Nikud hides in, being able to play with the format. Do you see what I'm saying? So what about Yeshua? What about the term Yeshua? Why isn't it Yeshua? Do you see? People use Yeshua more than they use Yehoshua, right? So why is it not Yeshua? So Yeshua is actually in the Bible. Ezra, the book of Ezra, uses the term Yeshua for Ben Yozadak. So let me give you some background really quick on all that. After the Babylonian captivity during the reign of the Persians over the world, I believe it was King Ahasuerus or Artaxerxes that allowed the Israelites to go back and rededicate the temple and rebuild the wall to Jerusalem, right? And the people that went back and who oversaw the whole thing were people whose names we know and people who we've heard of. Zerubbabel, Malachi, um, uh, Ezra, Nehemiah, Haggai. Do you see what I mean? These men were the men that were instrumental. Zechariah. These men, these are all men that have books, books of the Bible written, by their hand or by the hand of their scribe. So these are all prophets that were all alive at the same time, interacting with one another, all doing the same thing, rededicating the temple and rebuilding the wall to Jerusalem. So during this time, we have lots of writing. The book of Haggai, the book of Malachi, the book of Zechariah, the book of Nehemiah, the book of Ezra, all came out at the same time. All these men were alive and around each other. And all the books about, you know, all the works that they wrote and their scribes wrote talk about each other. Nehemiah talks about Ezra. Ezra talks about Nehemiah. Zechariah talks about Ezra. Zechariah talks about Nehemiah. Nehemiah talks about Zechariah. They all check each other. Do you see what I'm saying? All the stories are the same because all these men were alive and around at the same time, and they all interacted with one another and worshiped together and were, of course, in the same nation. So they all, the scripture calls them men wondered at. Do you see what I'm saying? They were in the forefront of the restoration of Israel during this reconstructive period. Do you see what I'm saying? So this particular time period was a very important one. And at the center of this period was a man named Yahusha, right? And while he doesn't have a book or he's not, mentioned with these prophets, he's very important in this time period because he's the first high priest reestablished in the temple, and they're crowning him in the book of Zechariah. And so the book of Zechariah talks about Yahusha ben Yahuzadek, and the book of Ezra talks about Yeshua ben Yahuzadek or ben Yizadak. I'm not sure which one that they use for his father's name, which is Yahuzadak, which means Yahweh is righteousness. I'm not sure which one that is, but I'm not sure which one they use, but this is the same Yahusha, the same Joshua, if you will. And we'll get to the reason why they use Joshua too here in a minute, because they do use the name Joshua. But this is the same person because Ezra talks about him and then Zechariah talk about him. And it's the same story, it's the same position, same father, same person, right? Except in Ezra, they translate his name Yeshua, and in Zechariah, they translate his name, or I say they have in the text, the actual text says Yeshua in Ezra, and the actual text in Zechariah says Yahusha. So what's his name, right? Is it Yeshua or Yahusha? Is it both? So what's the difference between Ezra and Zechariah? So the difference between Ezra and Zechariah is that Ezra is written in Aramaic. Do you see what I mean? And so since it's written in Aramaic, it is, there are instances in the text where where people with an Aramaic understanding or people who read Aramaic may stumble across some of these sacred utterances, right? And so in these times, in the Aramaic times, you will find that a lot of names are shortened to hide the name. So they were hiding the name way before the Mizrahites because they had the understanding that through Israel, the name of the Father is brought to nothingness or it's desecrated. It says the Gentiles, what's that verse? The Gentiles desecrate the name of the name of Elohim through you. We're talking about the Jews, right? That the Jews using the name and then being themselves less less than righteous people caused the Gentiles to take the name of Yahweh and desecrate it, right? Because of the way that we're acting. So this is what happens later on, that that the people that are using Aramaic start to try to hide what the name is, and you can see that in the text of Ezra, because the future scribes that have compiled these, writings, saw fit in the Aramaic times to hide the name of salvation and to erase the name of the Father from the first syllable of the word. Do you understand what I mean? So with Yeshua, Yeshua doesn't mean the same thing as Yahusha. It means something different. Yeshua could either mean salvation, just salvation in general, or it could mean opulence. It could mean both of those different things. It wouldn't have just a singular meaning. It could mean either one. So that means there is with Yeshua something that's failing, something that's missing from salvation. Do you see what I'm saying? And so if the text, I'm sorry, you guys, I think I got a mosquito bite right there. And mosquitoes bite you in the place where you just cannot reach, right? Just beyond your hand. I don't know how they know to do that, but they do. Um, so the name Yeshua is a clear corruption of the more ancient name Yahusha. We know where that name originates. The first person to ever have this name was Joshua, right? And he wasn't born with that name. He was given that name by Moses. Do you understand what I'm saying? His name was Hosea. His name was Hosea, like Hosea. Again, it's another mistranslation there, misinterpretation, another vowel-pointed misinterpretation. Hosea, the book of Hosea, is the same name as what Joshua's original name was, right? So, let's see. All right, it looks like I just got an email there. So the way that that we know that this name is special is because it was given by Moses, and his name Hosea, originally Hosea, you just put a yod in front of it and make it Yahusha. You see what I'm saying? It's very simple. It was given in the beginning, right? And so we see that name again in the text in Zechariah, Ezra, and we know that, over 1,200 instances, it's not spelled the way that it's spelled in Ezra. I think there's less than 50 usages of that name, Yeshua, in Ezra, which means it must have been something different, which means it's the consonantal form Yahusha. Do you see what I'm saying? Yahusha. Very simple. So not only that, the book of Zechariah, talking about the same person at the same time, is in Hebrew. And Ezra, of course, is in Aramaic, which is different, which is Babylonian. You would take the Hebrew form over the Aramaic form. Of course, all the information is still accurate. And it's not because Ezra is written in Aramaic, do we throw away Ezra? No, we just restore some of the things that we know the people that were in the Aramaic era would have done, right? They would have hid the name. They would have changed those, technical things to like, and the term Jeremiah or Yirmiyah comes from the Aramaic era. They'll drop that that waw at the end, so you don't know really how to pronounce the name. It's Yah, Yah, but you don't know anything besides Yah, right? So that waw gets dropped at the end during this Aramaic time frame, and we know that the reason why is because of the Gentiles hearing people and copying, or then also defiling the name too, bringing it to nothingness or bringing it to desolation by, using the name in cursings or in magic spells, because this is what ends up happening. This is why we know later on what the name is, because the Greeks tried to add it into their magical utterances, hearing the Jews do it. Do you see what I mean? So we'll get to that. So the way that they break this name down in Zechariah is exactly the way they break it down in the book of Joshua with Yahusha ben Nun, in the book of Numbers and Deuteronomy with Moses, right? With Moses and Yahusha, right? This is where Moses adds the yod to the beginning and forms the name for the first time, Yahusha, meaning Yah is salvation, right? Moses is the one that gave that name to Joshua. And I'll explain why this is the name of Joshua here in a minute, and where Joshua comes from too. But the way that we see it spelled in Zechariah is exactly the same way that the Torah spells it. So Ezra is the outlier, and Zechariah is the one that we should go by for pronunciation. And then what does it say in Zechariah about Yahusha ben Yahuzadak? It says, crown him with the crown of silver and gold in chapter 6, and crown him, he will go forth and rebuild the temple, right? It says, behold, the man whose name is the branch. It says, behold, the man whose, I had a teacher show me this years and years ago, one of my favorite teachers, even though, you know, he's kind of a weird character too. Yeah, all of my teachers were weird characters. He was weird in a different kind of way. He pointed this scripture out to me, and my mind was blown. I said, do you mean that the name of salvation was predicted? It says, behold the man whose name is the branch. And if you know who the branch is, if you know who that is, even going back to the book of Jeremiah, right? The book of Isaiah, then you'll understand that the branch was in reference to the Messiah. The Messiah even says, I am the true vine, you are the branches, right? The group, the Natsarim, right? Because he's from Nazareth. It says, behold, he'll be called a Natsarat or Natsarim. In the book of Isaiah, this is only a scripture that you'll find in Hebrew, that he's called a Natsarim. That's why in Matthew, when it says born in Nazareth, that it fulfills the prophecy of Isaiah, I think it's 11. I think this is Isaiah 11:1. The shoot, stem from Jesse, the shoot is a branch. The stem is a branch. Do you see what I'm saying? This is why he was born in Nazareth, right? Natsar means branch. So behold, the man whose name is the branch. This, and I believe they use a different word there than Natsar. I think there's another one that means the same thing. I think it's it begins with a shin, or yeah, a shin. I'll have to look that one up. I can't remember exactly what word they use in Zechariah. It's not Natsar. It's a different one. But it points to Natsar. Behold the man whose name is the stem, whose name is the branch. Goes back to Jeremiah, and the branch it'll be a branch of David, and the branch will save them. I can't remember the way that text goes either, but it mentions branch twice, I believe in Jeremiah 23 and then again in 33, I think. And then, of course, the Isaiah reference as well. You know, going back a long time for the Messiah being referenced as the branch. In Zechariah, it says, this is the branch's name. Zechariah is written about 500 BC, 500 years before the branch was born. The angel says he was given this name because of the angel that came before him. Do you see what I'm saying? All of these references to the name of salvation exist in the text and have existed there for thousands of years. Do you see what I mean? And in Zechariah, they spelled the name Yod, He, Wah, Shin, Ayin. In Numbers, they spell the name Yod, He, Wah, Shin, Ayin. In Deuteronomy, they spell the name Yod, He, Wah, Shin, Ayin. In Joshua, we call him Joshua. They spell Joshua Yod, Hey, Wah, Shin, Ayin, Yahusha, right? You notice that Joshua is used in the text, but there's no Joshua in the New Testament. Can you find the name Joshua in the New Testament? It's not there. The reason why is because every instance of Joshua, they just put Jesus. You can go to Acts chapter 7, verse 45, and I've talked about this before. And I think it's 45, 44, 45, where it says that Jesus brought in, after Moses, the children of Israel into Israel, right? And we know that wasn't Jesus, that was Joshua. And so it says, if Jesus could offer us rest, then there wouldn't have been spoken of another day in Hebrews chapter 4. Jesus is not the one that, it says if Jesus offered us rest. So it said Jesus doesn't offer us rest, right? He said, then it wouldn't have been spoken of another day. No, this is Joshua they're talking about that offered them rest in the land of Israel, that there was a bigger rest to come. Do you see what I'm saying? The bigger rest being Yahusha, being the Messiah, right? And then having the same namesake. So this Jesus, what you see in Acts chapter 4, or Acts chapter 7, and then Hebrews chapter 4, is the name that they've used for Joshua, right? They, every time that they see the Hebrew structure for Joshua in the text, where they've translated, this is a proof that the New Testament was translated, y'all. So anytime they see the word they were translating for the term Yahusha, they put Jesus, right? Even if it wasn't quote unquote Jesus as Joshua, they just put Jesus every time because it was the same Hebrew name. So Jesus and Joshua have the same name, proven by the New Testament. And so what is that name? You go back to Joshua and look at how it's spelled in Joshua. Yod, Hey, Wah, Shin, Ayin. For there is one name under heaven given among men whereby we must be saved. And that's Yahusha. Notice, was that Peter or John that said that? I believe it was John. But notice that he says there's one name under heaven given among men whereby we must be saved. He didn't say there's one name where we must be saved. He said there's one name given among men. So that means men have had the name before. So that means that there is a man's name that you can call on for salvation. And it just so happens that the man who was called for salvation, bringing you into Israel originally from Egypt, is Yahusha ben Nun, the man reestablishing being the high priest after a time of extreme captivity coming out of Babylon during the Persian Empire, the man reestablishing the temple sacrifices and being the leader of the temple sacrifices, Yahusha ben Yahuzadek, the man that came, lived a perfect life, and died and was risen 3 days later, is Yahusha ben Elohim. And that name predicted going back to the time of Zechariah is spelled like it's spelled in Zechariah and pronounced in the ancient Hebrew form as Yahusha, meaning Yah saves. Yah is salvation. Not Yah is opulence, not Yahoo, not Yeho, not Shua. Very simply, Yahusha. You guys understand what I mean? And so I'm going to show you something else in the text. The name is very, very, very important because you remember in the book of Hebrews, chapter 4, the same chapter, where it says, "Lo, I come in the volume of the book, it is written of me." That's another prophecy going back to Psalms chapter 40. "Lo, I come in the volume of the book, it is written of me. I have come to do thy will." Do you see what I'm saying? It says a body has been given for a body has been given for me. So it literally says in the text that that a body is going to be given for this person who comes in the volume of the book. Do you see what this is? An incredible prophecy, you guys. There is a body given, a body, like a human body. What does that mean if you don't understand Messiah for who he is today? What does that mean? Where is the interpretation? Yeah, hold on, I'm coming.
Tomorrow war, not the tomorrow war, the day after tomorrow.
That's not the one we're gonna watch right now. We're gonna watch something different.
Not that one, Mama.
All right, I'm coming in a minute. I'll be done in a second. All right, y'all go inside. So the name of salvation then is very clear in the text. It screams at you in the text. And so the verse is Psalms chapter 40. It says, "Lo, I come in the volume of the book, it is written of me." So the volume of the book, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua. These are the volumes of the book. These are the books of the book, right? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua. What do all, because Genesis isn't Genesis. You guys recognize the name of the book of You guys recognize that the name of the book of Genesis is not Genesis. It's Bereshit. This is what the book of Genesis starts with. Bereshit. So that means in the head or in the beginning. The head is the beginning of something. So Bereshit is in the head. Exodus is Shemot, which is names. Leviticus is Oriqua, which means and he called. Uriqua, Wariqua. It is Warikra. So it's Kra in the imperfect form, but there's a wa in the front, so it takes it from a future tense to a past tense. It takes it from an imperfect to a perfect. So that would be and he called, right? And so the next one is Numbers, which is Bamidbar. The very first, and these are all, if you look at the very first verse in the first chapter of all these books, this is where these names come from. This is not just names that they made up and assigned to them, because literally the English words are the names that they made up and assigned to these books, right? So to recap, lo, I come in the volume of the book. Genesis is Bereshit, in the beginning. Exodus is Shemot, names, right? The root form is name, right? Uriqua is and he called. The root form is Kra, called. Bamidbar is in the wilderness. Midbar is wilderness. The bayat in front of it is representative of being inside, right? The bayat is a house. And if you look at the pictograph for a bayat, it's like a in the ancient Hebrew, it's like a roof covering a little domicile, right? Even the modern B is shaped like a roof and then a living quarter. The uppercase B is like a roof and a living quarter. It's a bayat, right? This is where we get the term Aleph Bayat from, or alphabet. This is where that term comes from. It's bayat. It's a pictograph for a house. The word bayat means house. So you can live in a house. So if you put a bayat in front of a word in Hebrew, it would go in. Like, so if you're going into Jerusalem, you say Be Yerushalayim, right? So this is Bamidbar. So you're going into the Midbar, which is the wilderness. This is the forest, the desert, right? So any wilderness just means any vast space of open land that's either desert-like or forest-like, or something where you can get lost in. Do you see what I'm saying? So in the wilderness is Numbers. And so the final book of the Torah is Deuteronomy, and that is the term Dabarim. So Deuteronomy means second law, but Dabarim means words. This is the book of words. Deuteronomy is actually Dabarim. It means the book of words. So you
So you break that down into its root form, in its word. Dabar means word, right? And then you have the book of Joshua, which is Yahusha. So let's read the volume of the book. It says, in the beginning, name called in the wilderness, word or the word Yahusha. You don't get that as being a coincidence when the volume of the book is written in time. Genesis comes before Exodus, Exodus comes before Leviticus, Leviticus comes before Numbers, Numbers comes before Deuteronomy, and these are all a steady flow of time, and then Joshua comes in time after that. If someone was like inventing this story, you couldn't have invented before the person was born that you're inventing it for. People would say, oh, well, that's some sort of reimagined prophecy that you're taking a future perspective, looking from looking from the future into the past, and you're recreating these events, these names, in order for it to your prophecy. But it just doesn't work like that. It's been the Torah for 1,500 years before there was a Messiah. Do you see what I'm saying? It's been the Torah the whole time. And after the Torah was given, Joshua leads the children of Israel into Israel. This is history before Yahusha. This is history at the time when the Psalms was being written, where it says, lo, I come in the volume of the book, right? Yahusha hadn't been born yet when the psalmist was writing about the volumes of the book. Yahusha ben Elohim, that is. Do you see what I mean? Somebody had to know that this person was coming. Both Zechariah and the psalmist knew that there was a person named Yahusha on the way. And there was. And when he got here, he changed the world. That's why it's important for us to know what his name is, how it's spelled, and how it's pronounced. Because if there's only one name given among men under heaven whereby we must be saved, then we got to know what it is. And if we see all these interpretations, these various interpretations of the name in reality to hide us from that name of salvation, it corroborates then that that's the name of salvation. Do you see what I'm saying? And it also corroborates that it's the name because we don't have it. We don't have it written anywhere at all. And it's the very easiest form. It's the simplest version, but we don't have it readily available. It has to be searched for. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yahusha is the simplest form of what's given. Yeshua is not what's given. It's given in Zechariah, but it's not in Zechariah, in Ezra, but it's given in a watered down form. And we know it's a watered down form because of Zechariah. Do you see what I'm saying? Yehoshua is not the name that was given because we know that the vowel points added those interpretations at a much, much later date when the Messiah was already born, died, and resurrected hundreds of years after that. So these Jews then, these false Jews then, because they were a false Jew set then, the Masorites are not bloodline Jews. We know that they had reason to scramble that name. Do you see what I'm saying? And so this is how we ascertain the name of salvation, through being able to look at the text and discern what the text is saying to us and how it's saying it. These different methods by which you find the name are really, really simple and really, really plain, but they're hidden. They're encoded in the text. And with research, prayer, and the Spirit, they can be found. And here we are today with the ability to call on the name of salvation freely, with an open and pure heart, knowing and very confident as to what that name is, where we didn't for the past at least 400 years. And if we did recognize it 400 years ago, we rejected it because, again, they were their father's children. Not us now, because we've been through 400 years of Christianity, which seared the concept of Messiah into our mind. So this is the usefulness of Christianity for for Hebrews is that now we are understanding ourselves to be followers of the Messiah, when before we didn't. We had to be beat up bad to accept the the Messiah as the Messiah. And here's the crazy part. He had to be changed into a Gentile for us to accept him. Like maybe if I change him into a Gentile, maybe then y'all, then you want to be heathens will accept him. And it was right. We did. And so when we now find out that he is actually our ancient brethren, that Elohim came down in the form of man and was among us, do you see what I mean? And among our people, now it behooves us to have this information and to be able to say it correctly because it's been trampled over for so long. Do you see what I'm saying? This is the purpose of 400 years of slavery, to get to where we are now, believing on Messiah, knowing his name, calling on his name, and depending on him in faith, and preaching him. Do you see what I'm saying? That's all I got, you guys. I did not get not one person coming to this one, but we're going to keep at it. We're going to keep pushing on. I think it's because I hadn't been on in a couple days or a few days. And so we're going to get back into doing these. Even if we don't get anybody that comes through, you know, I have faith that eventually we will. Okay, you guys. Shalom, shalom.